What's up, guys? It's Toad back with you. A losing night last night. It was 0-2-1. It really should have been 1-2. It looked like it was guaranteed that Idaho game was going to win. That Idaho game, I got it at +4 as I gave it out on the show. The line dropped to 2. It looked like the market was in agreement with that one. They were winning outright like the whole game, even though it was a close game. It was like, all right, they're either going to win this outright or they're at least going to cover this in the end. And no, they wound up losing by 4 right near the end, so it winds up being a push. My night would have been a lot better if it was the 1-2, man. And then, I can start sharing my screen already, I guess, to kind of talk about what happened here. I'm going to try to talk about a lot of games today, and hopefully it doesn't take too much time. There's a lot going on today, man. I maybe should start trying to start doing these at night with all these college basketball games, but the morning, market reads are more helpful than the, overnight sometimes, so I don't know. There are arguments for both, I could see. But the Charleston Southern game, I know they got blown out here, but was the game really what it looked like on the scoreboard? I'm not sure about that because they were hanging in this game for basically the entire first half. And look at the three-point percentage in this game. North Florida, 51.7% from three. Charleston Southern, 10.5%. Charleston Southern was 2 for 19 from beyond the arc. That's just an outlier, man. Even though, yeah, of course, they're the worst of the two teams, but still, you're not going to see that very often. In North Florida, 15 for 29. This is not going to happen very often, so I don't know what you can really say about that, but yeah, did I deserve the loss there? Probably, but even so, I think that it wasn't as bad as maybe it looked. That line did creep up a bit after I did my show. I said it was 7.5. I actually found 8s out there, basically right after I did the show, and then it wound up 7.5. So there was a little bit of take back on that one, but whatever. And then the hockey game just didn't get there. There were a decent amount of shots in that hockey game. Just the defenses didn't do that badly. The goaltending was pretty good in that one. So what can you say about that? Let's move on to today. I have a lot of plays here. I'm playing 2 college basketball games, 2 NBA, I think, and 1 college football, and skipping the small NHL card. So there's a lot to talk about here, man. I could say briefly here, we do have, I think I lost my college basketball tab here. We do have one big matchup, at least for college basketball, for the people that love college basketball. We do have one ranked matchup tonight, which I'll just mention briefly, between number 9 UNC and number 1 Kansas. I believe this is at Allen Fieldhouse in Kansas. Kansas is a 7.5-point favorite. I don't really see much going on in the market yet on this one, but let me see. Kansas is actually down from 8 to 7, it looks like. So it looks like there is maybe some play coming in on the North Carolina side. This is an interesting one, man. I don't know what to think about this. I haven't really gotten a chance to deep dive into the personnel for the college basketball teams yet, because a lot of times early season you want to kind of do what I talked about in football, where you want to try to find undervalued teams that are maybe lower conference teams that have a bunch of returning starters, so they already have that chemistry, and play against teams that maybe are bigger conference teams who are going to be laying favorite prices or whatever, but don't have chemistry yet because they're bringing in a bunch of new guys or whatever. But I haven't done that yet. I've been just making spot plays, which is basically what I do, and that is what I'm doing again today, which I'll talk about a few different spots, and hopefully this doesn't take that long. But UNC, Kansas, I haven't looked to see what the personnel is, but Davis is still there for North Carolina. There's still some returning starters for both these teams, I think, from last year. But a couple of questions here pretty much. Well, number one is, does Kansas deserve this number 1 ranking? I'm not sure that they do. I don't really know how these preseason rankings come out. They're all based on the personnel, basically, and you haven't seen these teams actually play on the court yet. But then on the other hand, North Carolina played better than Kansas when it came down the stretch last year. North Carolina made a deeper tournament run than Kansas did last year. North Carolina finished a lot better. So maybe that will motivate Kansas a little bit in this one. Of course, Allen Fieldhouse is a tough place to play as well. But Kansas, they were really injured down the stretch, man. Going into the tournament there, they had a couple of key injuries, which is one contributing factor to why they had an early exit, although it wasn't the only contributing factor. I think Kansas was an overrated team last year as well. Maybe they still are here. So I do actually think maybe North Carolina is still the more trustworthy of these two teams here, maybe catching a couple too many points in this one, but really hard to read these early college basketball games, man, especially when it's not really there's no like spot play or anything like that as far as the schedule. North Carolina beat Elon, even though he's in the Trump administration now. Oh no. And then Kansas beat Howard and just absolutely annihilated them. So both teams basically won against cupcakes in their first games. So that doesn't really matter either. But Kansas being the number one team may also put a target on their back, because the number one team always has a target on their back. And maybe North Carolina thinks that they're still the better of these two teams, even though odds makers are telling you they're not. But there is a chance that the line, like I said, is maybe a little bit too high in this one. So that's how I read that. Looking at a bunch of these other college basketball games, I was looking at St. Peter's against UMass Lowell first, and it looked like maybe a spot to fade St. Peter's, but UMass Lowell's down from 8.5 to 7.5, and I've also seen UMass Lowell play because they're on like ESPN. Well, they're on the Watch ESPN a lot at the very least, and they're local to me, so I've tuned into UMass Lowell quite a bit, and I don't know who they have on their team this year. I don't know if their best player from like the last couple of years is gone. I forget what his name was, Max something, I think. I don't even remember. But UMass is a team. They just look really, really awful at times offensively. So not really a team that I want to lay a price with, although I was considering doing it in this case because St. Peter's is coming up a pretty big game, man. They almost beat Seton Hall. This is a close game. I don't think we have this is one of the ones where it's missing the graph to see what actually happened in the game. But this is a low-scoring, basically pretty much a close game, almost wire to wire. And St. Peter's almost upset their in-state big brother because they're both in the state of New Jersey, Seton Hall. So that was a big win for St. Peter's. And up next, they have another in-state big brother in ranked Rutgers coming up next. And this is kind of an unfamiliar location to go to, and it's sandwiched in there as a second straight road game going to UMass Lowell with not a lot of time between these games either. So I think it's a sandwich spot for St. Peter's. I haven't gotten there with this one, but I do lean to the UMass Lowell side. UMass Lowell, I mean, they're coming off an easy win over, I don't even know who the hell this is, Rivier. Don't ask me. Some non-Division I team there. But UMass Lowell does have Gonzaga up next, and that is a giant game. But that is, it's going to be the biggest opponent they face, although they're probably going to get absolutely annihilated in that game. But that's not for a week as well, so they don't have anything up closer on the horizon. So I do like UMass Lowell in that one, but laying points like this with UMass Lowell, maybe a little bit iffy, although the odds makers are at least telling you they're the better team than St. Peter's. And St. Peter's is because they made that ridiculous run in the tournament a couple of years ago, and they got into the tournament last year too. They were not the best team in the MAAC either of those years, though. But I think because they keep showing up in the tournament, I think the public perception is kind of, oh, the St. Peter's program is pretty good. I mean, they're a decent program for that conference, but the odds makers are telling you UMass Lowell is the better team there, and it's a bad spot for St. Peter's. So I'm just going to point that out. IPFW was another one I was looking at. Let me look at the let's see. I don't know how they even have it listed here. Do they have it listed as IPFW? Yeah, they do, against UCF. But UCF's up from 9.5 to 11. But that does mean that if you like the idea of fading UCF, which is my opinion in this one, you actually at least get a better number on IPFW. I'm not going to do this one, and the line does look like it's moved against it. It's tough to gauge when you don't really see any of these percentages yet. But I think UCF is actually in a bad spot in this one. Let me look. Man, I'm taking a long time to talk about college basketball. Hopefully I can get through these. I mean, UCF, they're coming off a big upset over Texas A&M, man. At home, they beat Texas A&M as the 13th ranked team. However, I can tell you right now, Texas A&M, way overrated. They're the number 13 ranked team in the country to start out the season. But you look at like KenPom, who's the best power rating system that's out there. And I pay for KenPom as well because it's pretty cheap. It's only like $20-$30 a year or something. He gives you all the, it's really nice to have all the individual game predictions, but still you can get his like just the straight up power rankings for free. I think if you go there, he has Texas A&M ranked like 60th. So they're not even close to a top 25 team according to KenPom, at least right now. And UCF handled them, but UCF was only a 5.5 point underdog in this game, man. So that also tells you, yeah, this Texas A&M team is overranked, man, with that line being that low. So this looks like a huge upset. Based on the number in the game, it wasn't as big of an upset, but still, UCF's coming off a huge win over Texas A&M. They get this game against IPFW, who was a team that they don't usually face and a team from the horizon. So UCF might kind of this is a Big 12 team in the UCF now. They just beat an SEC team, so that's a much bigger game for that reason as well. And up next, they have Florida Atlantic, who I think that FAU team that made the tournament the last couple of years and made that huge run to the Final Four. I think those guys, even though they were there the last couple of years, I think they have had some guys graduate finally from that team, so maybe they're not as good, but that still might be something that UCF is looking ahead to, man, because FAU has been one of the better teams in the state of Florida recently, so there is a chance they overlook this IPFW team. And IPFW, I don't know what they're coming off of right now. They're coming off of beating Bluffton. I don't even know who the hell that is, but they have a game under their belt, so it's kind of like a tune-up type of game. And now they have to step up in class at the very least, whereas UCF is already battle-tested at the very least. But it looks like a bad spot to me for UCF. So that was almost one that was going to make my card as well. Then I got two actual plays that I was going to talk about. South Alabama and Nichols is interesting to me a little bit. Nichols is down from 7.5 to 5.5. I agree with that move, although you're not getting the 7.5 anymore if you like the idea of playing against Nichols. I do agree with the South Alabama side in this one, and it's actually kind of bizarre to me to see a Southland Conference team that isn't McNeese in Nichols. Who are they even any good? I don't know. To see them being a favorite at home against a Sunbelt team seems a little weird to me, but maybe Nichols might actually not be as bad this year. Maybe South Alabama is not as good, or maybe it's a combination of both. But Nichols, they're coming off a big game. They went into New Mexico, and that is not an easy place to play, dude. In Albuquerque, in the pit, which is in high elevation, and it's this weird stadium that goes down underground. And if you're not used to playing there, it's not an easy environment to play in. New Mexico may have taken them a little bit lightly, although New Mexico led for the entire second half. But still, Nichols didn't go away in that game. They played a pretty tough game there. But it might also be a situation where it looks better than it actually was for Nichols, because they shot 40.5% from three, and New Mexico was just missing everything, only shooting 19.4%. So those are some outlier percentages there as well. So that game, maybe New Mexico should have won that game slightly more easily, but then again, the other stats are in favor of Nichols as well, except they had a ton of turnovers, which is pretty much why they wound up losing the game. But Nichols, that's a big game that they're coming off of, man, and maybe they're going to be a little bit gassed after that. Now, this is going to be their conference opener, though, and for South Alabama, they're coming off a loss in a home game where they were a favorite against Central Michigan, who's not really that good. South Alabama was just getting kind of blown out for a lot of the second half here. They did not look good in that game. They did not play a good game in that one. They wound up losing the game to Central Michigan. It was still fairly close in the end because South Alabama made a nice comeback. But South Alabama, so you have a team, South Alabama lost as a favorite, and they're up against Nichols, who had a close call as a pretty big underdog here. So that has me leaning to the South Alabama side here. But South Alabama does have a big game against Ole Miss coming up in a couple of days. So I don't know if that's going to be cause for look ahead or not, because they are still looking for their first win. But it is going to be Nichols' home opener as well. So I don't know if that's going to be a huge factor or not there. But Nichols laying a price like this does look a little bit weird to me. So maybe it could be a little bit of a misleading spread because they're from the weaker conference, but they look like they're in the worst spot. So I agree with that move. Harvard against Navy is also interesting. Man, I'm talking about way too many games. Navy is sitting at a 1.5-point favorite in this one. I'm trying to remember what my thoughts were on this. I think I lean to the Harvard side in this one because Navy, this is a game I'm going to talk about in a second, by the way, St. Joe's. So you pretty much know that means I'm going to have a play on St. Joe's here with the way that I do things. Navy, they were winning this game throughout the entire first half, man. They had a big lead over St. Joe's as a big road underdog in Philadelphia. 15.5-point underdog. Navy was outplaying them for the first half, and then they just kind of fell apart and wound up losing the game, keeping it close near the end, but not being able to do it. When a team has a close call as a big dog like that, man, you want to go against them in the next game after that. So that would be my recommendation, and that one would be to go against Navy in the game coming up after that, which is today. I think they're in a bad spot coming off of that. And Harvard, kid, I think they're in a spot where Harvard is, they're not really coming off of anything big. They beat Marist, although Marist played unexpectedly well in the MAAC last year, but still Harvard, they just took care of business, I assume, as a home favorite in that game. Harvard's still one of the top few or so Ivy teams. Harvard was actually only 2.5 in that game. That's actually kind of wild. But Harvard now, I would say they have to go on the road here, but this is actually a neutral site game. This is the Veterans Classic. So that's another thing just be aware of with a lot of these early season college basketball games. A lot of these are neutral site games, although this one, it's the Veterans Classic, but I guess this is being hosted by Navy, though. So this is actually still a home game for Navy, so never mind on that. This is still at Annapolis, at Navy's home arena, but it is one of those early season tournaments as well, but Navy just happens to be the team that's hosting it, so they are actually the home team there. I'll just point out quickly, I think Villanova is probably in a bounce-back spot because they lost to Columbia. I don't know what happened there, how that happened, but Villanova, I mean, after an embarrassing loss like that, is I assume a pretty big favorite, 17.5. I don't know what Columbia is doing after this, by the way, so I might want to look to see where Columbia is playing. Hey, usually Friday nights, there are no college basketball games except for Ivy, so we'll see. Columbia's facing Delaware State tomorrow. I don't know if that's really something I want to get involved in, but they are going to be in a letdown spot after that. But Villanova, they should be in a bounce-back spot here after losing a game that they really should have won as a big favorite. So against NJIT, even though that's not a big team at all, they may show up focused for this one just because they had an embarrassing loss. NJIT is actually coming off a tough game against Penn, who is not one of the worst Ivy teams, really. And Penn was an 8.5-point favorite in that one, and NJIT had the lead for the entire game. They were leading by double digits for a lot of the game here and wound up completely just falling apart, basically, and not scoring anything for a huge stretch, and Penn wound up beating them. So NJIT looks like they're in a bad spot to me, too. So I recommend the Villanova side here if you do look at this game. Villanova, although it's a game with not a particularly high total, though, and Villanova's laying a huge price, down from 22 to 21.5, but I do expect Villanova to bounce back and show up in that one, and NJIT to maybe not be able to sustain a big effort like that against a couple of superior teams to them in a row like that, although NJIT is not going to not show up. I mean, they're not going to overlook Villanova. It's just they just might succumb because they're just probably not good enough, and they might run out of steam. So that would be the look there. At Texas A&M, I also kind of expect them to be in a bounce back after their upset loss there, but they might be laying too many points, down from 33.5 now to 31. So it looks like there is some movement on Texas A&M Commerce, who is at least an in-state little brother there, and a Texas A&M little brother. And then I was going to talk about Long Beach and South Dakota State real quick. South Dakota State's up from 9 to 9.5. I wound up not playing this one. This is one of the first ones I had my eye on because South Dakota State started the season with a double-digit upset of McNeese. McNeese, we remember, was one of the surprises of last year and dominated the Southland Conference. They were one of the best Southland Conference teams that we've seen maybe ever, and they were competitive with some big conference teams too, and they of course made the tournament, but they did get blown out by Gonzaga once they got into the tournament because Gonzaga was just too much for them. But that's still a big upset win to start the season for South Dakota State. Now they got Long Beach coming in. Long Beach actually won their conference last year after they fired their coach. They came from out of nowhere and did it. Long Beach is coming off kind of a tune-up game to start the season against a non-D1 team in Laverne. So they might be ready for this. So they are having to go out on the road into kind of an unfamiliar environment to San Diego State. So I don't know, kind of a weird trip where then they're going to return back to California after this to face San Francisco. So I don't know. So I still would agree with fading South Dakota State, just because of their big win that they're coming off of. But it's not a game that I really totally want to get involved in. And now let's talk about my actual plays. My favorite of the two, as I mentioned, is St. Joseph's minus 14.5. This is one of the ones where the spot lines up on both sides, similar to that Villanova one. But the market read, it didn't look quite like it was going my way, as it had dropped from 16.5 to 14.5. But this morning it was in the 15s, 15.5, and now it's back down to 14.5. So I don't know what's going on here. The line is kind of just bouncing back and forth, but I like St. Joseph's to take care of business in this one as the superior team. Ken Pom, I think, has them as a 14-point winner in this one, so that's within the margin that when I double-check with Ken Pom, unless it's like somewhat substantially off, it's usually fine for me to go with my situational read here. Central Connecticut State, they're in a hangover spot, man. They went to Providence, a Big East team, big game for Central Connecticut, and Providence probably overlooked this Central Connecticut team, and if there's anything that you could say about Central Connecticut is they play an ugly, slow game, and they slow you down, and they try to stay in the game, and that does serve well as a big underdog. But I'll tell you why I don't think it's going to happen in this game in a second. But Central Connecticut, they did not even hit a three-pointer in this game, dude. They just held on to the ball. They didn't even shoot well at all, but they didn't turn the ball over hardly at all. So they got outplayed by Providence fairly substantially, but they just slowed the game down to such an ugly degree. And Providence committed so many turnovers that it allowed Central Connecticut to stay in this game, even though Central Connecticut really, based on these stats, had no business being in this game. 0 threes is just insane. I mean, that's not going to happen again, but the Central Connecticut team, not exactly a great shooting team, though. But they were 18.5-point dogs, and they wound up playing really tight right until the end. I mean, this game was tied in the final couple minutes of the game, so Central Connecticut almost pulled off the huge upset, and now they have to go and play St. Joe's. Not an easy thing to do, not an easy place to be here. And St. Joe's, what are they coming off of? They almost lost to Navy, as I just pointed out. This is a game where St. Joe's was actually getting kind of blown out in the first half. Navy had a double-digit lead for a huge extent in this game, and then St. Joe's wound up finally turning it on and being able to overcome them in the second half and being able to, St. Joe's, of course, is the better team, but St. Joe's is a 15.5-point favorite and maybe overlooked Navy a little bit and almost lost that game. So I think that's going to serve to refocus St. Joe's here. So this is a game where normally they would not have a reason to be totally focused against a low, Northeastern Conference team in Central Connecticut. But because St. Joe's played poorly in this opener against Navy, I think that's going to serve to focus them. And they're going to be like, oh, we got away with one here. We got to play better than this, guys. I think that's going to kind of be their mindset, although they did wind up outplaying Navy fairly substantially, statistically, in that game. But you have a reason for St. Joe's to show up focused in this one, and Central Connecticut coming into this game in a big hangover spot off a huge game. So I don't know that they can sustain that 2 games in a row. So St. Joe's is the first play, and the other play is Hofstra, -3.5. This one has gone up. It had already gone up when I looked at it last night from 2 to 3.5. It looks like it's going up further through the 3.5. So I don't know where this line's going to land. KenPom, I think, has this around 3. So that's fine as far as like laying 3.5. I wouldn't want to lay that much more than that. If it gets to be like more than 4, it's getting maybe a little bit dicey. Hofstra, I mean, nothing to really talk about here. They won against, I don't even know who this team is. Old Westbury. Yeah, okay. That might be a Connecticut non-Division I team. I don't know who they are, but just kind of a tune-up game to get the season off on the right foot for Hofstra, basically. They do have Seton Hall up next, which is a fairly big game, and that's a Big East team, but I don't know if they're going to really overlook Iona either, because Iona has been kind of a staple of the MAAC for a while, even though Iona does consider Hofstra to be a bigger brother to them. So Iona does have reason to show up in this game, but I think Hofstra may just be too much the better team here, and Hofstra in a better conference, of course, the Colonial as well. But look at what Iona's coming off of, man. They're playing a second straight road game, even though, again, like I said, this isn't their home state at least, and it is a big brother to them, but I don't know if they're going to be able to sustain this effort. Just like I said with Central Connecticut, because Iona, they had a huge lead at Princeton. Princeton, who's been one of the top Ivy teams for a couple of years running now. Princeton has been a pretty good team, even not even considering that they're an Ivy team. They've been good just in general. They've been competitive with bigger conference teams as well. Iona had a huge lead against Princeton well into the second half, and then they just totally stalled out, and Princeton was able to get ahead of them. Iona continued to battle, still had the lead a couple of times late, and then wound up losing by 1, like right near the end. That's a brutal way to lose. And I think Iona kind of overperformed here. I mean, they shot 46.2 from 3. I'm not sure that that's going to happen again, even though they did out-rebound Princeton as well. 17 turnovers, though, so they were making mistakes, so that's kind of to be expected on the road. But they are on the road again here against a superior team, although not as good a team as Princeton. But I don't know if we're going to see Iona shoot 53.6 from the floor again and 46.2 from 3. That looks a little bit of an outlier. Princeton did outshoot them from the floor, though. Not as much from three-point percentage, but Iona may regress a little bit here. And that was a 12.5-point line in that game, so Iona was a pretty big dog in that one. So I like Hofstra in that one for those reasons, -3.5. Moving over to NBA as my voice cracks and I'm going through puberty here. NBA, we got a bunch of games on tap here. I'm just going to point out real quick. Lean to the Pistons against the Hawks, but the sole read there is really just that the Pistons I mean, the Hawks are coming off beating the New York Knicks, who are one of the better teams in the Eastern Conference, despite what their record is. I know, but I still think the Knicks are a very good team. So Hawks maybe in a little bit of a letdown because they're not really that great a team, and they're coming off a physical game against the Knicks that they wound up pulling off the upset. Pistons have flipped basically to the favorite now from a 1-point dog. It looks like it's headed to them being a 1-point favorite. Pick them minus 120 right now. I don't see the percentages yet, but it looks like the money is coming in on the Pistons side. So that is the side I would look to there. I don't like the Pacers side, although they're up from 5.5 to 7 with 91% of the cash and only 62% of tickets on the Pacers. I don't think they're in a great spot either because they just pulled off another big win, I think. Pacers playing a bunch of big games here. This looks a bit sandwichy to me, although it's not like the biggest game, but they beat Orlando, who I know Orlando's injured now without Banchero, so not that big a game, but I expected that to be maybe kind of a letdown for Indiana because they were coming out beating Dallas. So they've had two pretty step-up games in a row, two pretty big games in a row. Now they have Charlotte mixed in here, have to go out on the road for one game against Charlotte before they then have to play the Knicks and then Orlando again and then Miami. So this is kind of a down scheduling spot there. So I don't like the Indiana side in that one, even though the market does look like it's indicating on it. I would not want to find myself on that side. And then what do we got? I don't know if there's anything else to comment. I believe is it the Kings or the Lakers? One of these teams, Lakers, I think, are returning home from a huge road trip. Let me just see here. I can get rid of college basketball here now. As I go here, I can get rid of these tabs. Lakers, I believe it's the Lakers who are returning home from a road trip. Yeah, they had a road trip that took them basically all the way east for a bit, almost all the way east, up into Toronto as far as it went. And they didn't have a good road trip, only winning that game against Toronto, who's probably the worst team that they faced. Toronto, maybe the worst team in basketball, even worse than Detroit. But the Lakers lost all these other games on this road trip. And Detroit and Memphis, not exactly a gauntlet to face there, but maybe they're tiring out at the end of the road trip. I said I'm not sure the Lakers are really that great at this point. I think they have questionable depth, and their top two guys are so old at this point in James and AD that I don't know. But they're returning home from a road trip. Doesn't look like a good spot to me because the road trip return, like I said, it always comes with distractions. You're returning back home, especially when you've been away for that long. You're having to fly almost all the way back across the country with only one day off. I don't think it's a good spot for them, but they are grabbing the Philadelphia 76ers, who they're a team that just can't get healthy, man. And Paul George came back. He's played 2 games now. And now Maxey is out. So Maxey is now injured. He got injured in the last game. Maxey pad. He's gone. And Joel Embiid is still not back because even if he was going to be able to return from whatever injury he has, he got suspended for shoving a reporter or something like that. So this Philadelphia team, I mean, they are in disarray right now. I want no part of this game. But it does look to me like the Lakers are in kind of a bad spot. Philadelphia, if there's anything positive for them, they're at the very least staying in LA, so their travel spot is way better. They just got blown out by the Clippers after playing a pretty close game against Phoenix. And maybe this is going to be an injured player theory spot now with Maxey out because he is one of their starters, although he's not their most important starter. But with Embiid out, I mean, Maxey is up there as far as their best player, so maybe it'll be a spot where Philadelphia actually shows up because it is the Lakers. They are coming off a blowout, and they know they might have to step up their game to accommodate for Maxey being out. I don't know if that's going to be the case or not, but they don't have a bigger game up next either. They want to maybe salvage the last game of the road trip as well. So as ugly as it seems, I would lean to the 76ers in that one, but there's no way I'm going to play that. Sixers are at 60% of the tickets, though, with the Lakers, 64% of the cash. But, man, I don't like the spot for the Lakers in that one. My actual plays, number one, these plays are going to be actually pretty easy to swallow in the NBA because I'm not playing really bad teams here. I'm playing decent or good teams against other good teams, and it's about the spot. Cleveland minus 4.5. I know I keep saying Cleveland is not as good as they look, as their undefeated record is, but they're playing the Golden State Warriors right now, man. I think the Warriors, the stock is too high on the Warriors right now, too, man, and I don't like the spot for the Warriors. Cavs are up from 4 to 4.5 with 87% of the cash and 67% of the tickets, so even though it looks like Cavs do have slight public action right now, it looks like the actual money is coming in on the Cavs, driving the line up. Hopefully this doesn't change throughout the day. As I always say, the early market read may be a little bit more difficult sometimes, but I try to combine that with the situation and try to find spots where it all just kind of lines up for me. Hopefully I'm doing that here. The situation, I like the situation for the Cavs here, which I'll explain in 1 second, but I'm also thinking that the public Well, I mean, already you can see the cash is coming in more so on Cleveland than what the public thinks, than what the public is. But I think the public is maybe going to overrate the Warriors a little bit because they're off to a one-loss start. Even though they are facing an undefeated Cavs team here, it's still the Warriors. It's Steph Curry, so the Warriors still have the bigger names here. And what the public perception is, I think the public might look at this and think, hey, I'm getting points with this Warriors team, and they just beat the Boston Celtics. So getting points looks like it might kind of be appealing to the public, man. When you got Steph Curry and whatever, and it's a Warriors team that's looked really good so far, and they're coming off a game where they beat the returning champs. And public perception might be, hey, if they can beat the returning champs, they can cover this number against Cleveland, right? Even though Cleveland is undefeated, I think the public, pretty much everybody knows Boston is still better than Cleveland. But Golden State, like I said, I mean, I think this record is a little bit misleading because they really have not played a difficult schedule at all. They played Portland, Utah, lost to the Clippers as their one loss. And the Clippers are kind of a mess right now, to be honest, even though they do have some good players there. They beat New Orleans twice. Houston is probably the best team that they face, maybe. I'm going to talk about Houston a little bit. Houston's not bad. They beat them in overtime. Then they face Washington. So then the best team they face, obviously, is Boston. But before they played Boston, they had not faced a very difficult schedule at all. They showed up for this Boston game, and they won. But now they're in the middle of a road trip, and even though it is an undefeated Cleveland team, you're coming off beating the returning champs, man. And the Celtics Warriors have kind of had this thing going for a couple of years now, where that was the finals matchup 2 years ago. So there's a little bit of a rivalry there. Just, it's a big win, man. An upset win for Golden State. I don't know if they're going to be able to sustain it going into Cleveland with one day off. And after that, they have to face the team that might be the best team in their own conference. And that's going to be a Western Conference battle there for early Western Conference supremacy, basically, against Oklahoma City, who also is 7-1. So that could even be a look ahead, man. Both of these games, Boston and Oklahoma City, actually probably mean more to Golden State than this Cleveland game does, despite the fact that Cleveland is undefeated and Dallas is up after Oklahoma City, the team that won the Western Conference after that. So this is actually, even though it's an undefeated Cleveland team, it's actually kind of a sandwich spot for Golden State, as crazy as that sounds. I like the Cleveland side in this one for those reasons, for all those reasons I just said. And it's a fourth straight road game. They won every game on the road trip. They beat Boston, all right? So I think right now it's considered to already be a successful road trip for them. Cleveland, on the other hand, I mean, I think it's a big deal with Golden State coming into their house, and they really have not had that much around this game. They just beat New Orleans, so all that's going to do is just continue their momentum. I think that's a good, momentum continuing win there against not a great New Orleans team, and I think New Orleans has been battling injuries as well. So that game, I mean, that's just kind of a whatever performance for Cleveland. I think they have their eye on this Golden State game, and they're continuing the momentum. They have the momentum coming into this, and they certainly don't have any bigger games up on tap. So I think it's going to be a full focus game for Cleveland here based on the schedule. And for Golden State, I think questionable whether or not it will be for them. So I like Cleveland. And then my other one is Houston plus 8.5 in the NBA here. I like the Houston side, even though the line looks like it's gone down from 10 to 8.5. I don't know when it was 10, to be honest. This is a fade of that Thunder team that I was talking about. I know, but the one thing about fading the Thunder at the very least is they are a very defense-oriented team, so them having to cover a larger number is a little bit more of an ask sometimes for them, just because they play good defense, although of course they can score as well. This Oklahoma City team is loaded, but I don't like the spot for Oklahoma City, man. They're 7-1, yeah, but that also means they're going to have a target on their back, but also they just lost their first game of the season, man. They were making a nice run. They hadn't really faced a difficult schedule so far. Even though, yes, I think they're the best team in the West, but they won at Denver, big win to start the season. Then after that, they really faced weak opponents, and then they caught Orlando, who is pretty good, but without Banchero. So Oklahoma City has not faced a very difficult opponent. Basically, the only very difficult opponent they faced was Denver, and that was their first and most recent game so far, both games at Denver. They went into Denver, they played a tough game, and they lost in the end to Denver. Denver got some revenge on them. That's a big game, man. It's the Denver Nuggets. I mean, they're still one of the top teams in the Western Conference. Having to go into elevation like that, losing a close game, it's a full-effort game there for Oklahoma City. They lost the game, but that also being their first loss, that can put you in a hangover spot, man. When you have that first loss, you can kind of lose the game twice, as I say with a lot of these sports. That can kind of hang them over into the next game. That might be the case here. Houston has been like an up-and-coming team, but with Golden State up next. This is a sandwich spot as well, it looks like. So this is weird. I have two sandwich spots where the opponent really is not a bad opponent, but it just happens that they're surrounded by even better opponents, and the spot just looks good for it. So Oklahoma City is also coming out of elevation again, which is not an easy thing to do either. Facing Houston here, but again, like I said, they have Golden State up next, who is tied record-wise with them. So I'm fading Golden State and Oklahoma City here, and they both might be looking ahead to that game up against each other. It is possible that Oklahoma City somewhat overlooks Houston here, and they're a little bit hungover from that last game. Houston, not a bad team, sitting at 5-3. They almost made the playoffs last year, and they're just they're hanging around. They haven't faced that difficult a schedule either, at least early on. They had a weird loss to Charlotte. I don't know how you can explain some of these losses. San Antonio, but they also then got revenge against San Antonio, beat Memphis, who we still don't even know how good Memphis is. They beat Dallas on the road. So that's a nice-looking win. They played Golden State into overtime. Also a nice performance there. They beat the Knicks. So this Houston team, they're a competitive team against some of the better teams in the NBA, man. And then in their last game, I think this helps them out in this game too. This is going to be a full focus game for Houston because they're just coming up beating San Antonio again. They had already gotten revenge against them. I know it's an in-state rivalry, but San Antonio's the littlest brother right now, so I don't think Houston cares about that. It's just they could have been that looked like a sandwich spot for Houston, actually, coming up beating the Knicks and having OKC up next, and they still took care of business, which tells me this Houston team is pretty good, man. If they can have kind of a bad spot like that where they might not be focused, and they'd just beaten that San Antonio team on the road to get that revenge there, and they played well against them anyway, blew them out, continuing momentum. That's going to continue their momentum here as well, and it tells me they can play well even in a bad spot. Now they're going out on the road. First road game, as I always say, that tends to be a focus spot, and they're playing one of the elite teams in the NBA, so I think Houston is going to show up. They're going to be focused. It's just a matter of can they play well enough against a superior team to come within this number. I think in this spot they can, and their next game is up against Detroit and then Washington. So you know which game is going to draw their focus here. So it's almost like an inverted sandwich as far as both of these teams that I'm playing on are concerned, because it's a game. It's like a full focus game for them, surrounded by lesser games, whereas the teams I'm playing against have a game where they might not be as focused, surrounded by bigger games. So Houston plus 8.5 in that one. We'll talk about hockey. I don't have a play in hockey, but it's a short schedule. I'll just mention Pittsburgh, I think, is in a difficult spot because they're in a third game in 4 days, all in different cities, and they just played a physical Carolina team last night. They did get their asses handed to them, but they got beaten up, probably physically as well. I don't know what the hits were in that game, but let me see. Carolina actually did not have that many hits. Pittsburgh showed up physically, though, and still lost the game by quite a bit, so I don't know. Maybe Carolina's not as physical as I think now, because they look like they have not put up a lot of hits in a lot of these games, but Pittsburgh's still coming off that game with no time off, and I know they should be focused on a Washington team that's played really well so far and been one of the surprises in hockey so far, but Pittsburgh, I mean, it's just going to be a fatigue spot, I think, for Pittsburgh. It doesn't look good to me for Pittsburgh there, so that's how I feel about that game. Not going to be a play, but Washington's up from minus 153 to minus 164 in that one. And then Minnesota, I think, is also in a third game in 4 days as well. And they've been playing really well this season, too. They're coming off an easy win over San Jose, but they're in a third game in 4 nights, all in different cities. So both Pittsburgh and Minnesota are, and they're both in back-to-back. So not the easiest rest spot for them. Minnesota, it is possible they overlook Anaheim a little bit just because Anaheim sucks, although it's surrounded by teams that aren't good either against San Jose and Chicago. So it's not a sandwich spot or anything like that. Anaheim needs to kind of get something right, but they are coming off a big game at the very least against Vancouver, but they've had extra time off, so they are a way more rested team at the very least with multiple days off and a chance to break some losing momentum there. And as far as Washington, I don't even know what rest they have, but they have more rest than, they have 1 day off at least, and are coming off a win over Nashville. But Minnesota, they could be in a little bit of a tired spot as well and maybe overlook Anaheim to some extent. But Anaheim, like I said, they're coming off that bigger game against Vancouver. They lost pretty badly, and they have multiple days off, so they are the more rested team at the very least. Minnesota's still at minus 180 right now there. And then Vegas, Seattle. I mean, this is an interesting game where I was considering maybe looking to an over. I know my over lost last night. My thoughts on overs in the NHL have been good, but I've really tried to pick spots where, like, the goalie history kind of lines up with it, but only gone 1-1 in those, which I would like to have done better in those, but I'm just going to stay off this one, but it looks like could be a type of over spot. Vegas, first look at this, they're in a bad spot. I mean, they just not upset, but well, it was an upset, I guess, because it was on the road. I don't know if McDavid was back for Edmonton in that game or not, but big win for Vegas beating Edmonton, man. So they're coming off a big game, beating the Western Conference champs from last year, having to play a second straight road game. And they have a good team in Carolina up next to them, playing kind of a middling Seattle team in the middle there. Vegas, it looks pretty sandwichy to me, so they could overlook Seattle in this spot. So my look was, okay, I kind of want to play Seattle in this game. But then I'm looking at Seattle, oh, crap. They're returning home from a long road trip, and they have multiple days off. And, yeah, those multiple days off, because they lost all these games, maybe having multiple days off will help them get their home affairs put away and, break that losing momentum, and maybe they'll be focused. Because it is Vegas coming into their house, so it is an opponent that's going to draw your focus, and they don't have anything big up next. So maybe that's the case, but still, returning home from a road trip that took you all the way up to Eastern Canada and then to the East Coast, basically, and kind of an extended road trip there, 5 games, and it took you into elevation at the end of it, into Colorado, and that's what you're coming out of. It looks like it's not a good spot for Seattle either for those reasons. Vegas is down from -140 to -139 with what looks like 95% of tickets and 100% of the cash right now. I think the cash percentage is not accurate, but Vegas, I think at the very least, will be public in this one. Maybe it's a spot where you'd want to attempt to fire on the money line on Seattle. I mean, I wouldn't hate you if you do that. I don't hate you guys anyway, but I wouldn't mind potentially doing that. I'm not doing it, but slightly into Seattle. But in that return home spot, I don't want to touch it. But I think the sandwich spot is just a little bit more significant for Vegas. Total looks like it's up a little bit with more juice on the over 6, but 50% of the tickets evenly split and 91% of the cash on the under. So the market percentages right now seem to be indicating on the under. I obviously don't agree with that way, but looking at the goalie matchup, I actually looked at that too, and it looks like both teams have kind of been alternating goalies, but Seattle mostly uses Decord, and it looks like it is going to be Decord back in net this one. He only played once, I looked, against Vegas last year and gave up no goals in a 3-0 shutout, so he played well against them. So that's another thing. The goaltender history doesn't look bad to me either. In Vegas, they've been alternating. It looks like it's going to be Samsonov again because Hill played the last 2. I looked up his stats against Seattle. He only played once against Seattle last year, and I think he didn't allow any goals in that game either. So the goaltender matchup doesn't look to be very over-conducive to me either, but who knows? I mean, maybe it will still go over just because it's a game where you might have a couple of teams that are just in bad spots, and maybe the defenses won't totally be up to it, but who knows? Maybe they will, especially on the Seattle side, because maybe they'll at least be focused on this game. Let's get to college football. We have 4 games of college football. I do have one play. I have some opinions on these for the most part. Not really in this first game up with Cal and Wake, and none of these games start at 7 p.m. tonight either, Eastern. So Cal is at Wake. They're up from 6.5 to 7.5. 77% of tickets, though, and only 60% of the cash. So it looks like we have seen... It's a fairly significant move, I would say, because it went through the key number 7 on Cal. But on the other hand, it looks like they're a public road favorite, and they have less of the cash than the tickets. But I don't really see much of a situational read in this one, to be honest, as far as either side is concerned here. Cal is the better overall team, though. I mean, they have a better offense and defense than Wake does. Cal's got Mendoza, the Mendoza line, man. He's been putting up pretty good passing numbers. This Cal rushing attack kind of leaves something to be desired a little bit, but I mean, their offense is decent in general. Both of these teams, I believe, are coming out of a bye as well, so both of these teams are pretty rested. Cal is coming off what looks like a big win where they beat their old conference foe, Oregon State, and blasted them, but I don't know that Cal's going to be in a letdown spot after that. I think that just might help break their losing momentum because they lost some games before that. They didn't have it easy. They faced Florida State, Miami, Pitt, NC State. I know Florida State hasn't been playing that well, but that's still not really an easy game for Cal to have to go all the way to the East and face Florida State. They played well against Miami and should have won that game. Then in a bad spot, having to go back East again. They were competitive again against Pitt and then lost going all the way back to the Pacific Coast against. They've been zigzagging all over the place. Lost to NC State, and then finally they stayed on the Pacific Coast for 2 games in a row, and it served them well, and they won. And that might help, like I said, break their losing momentum. And yes, I know they have to go out to an unfamiliar venue here, so that's not great for Cal, the fact they have to go out to Wake Forest. back to the East Coast, but at least they have a week off now to help that travel. But it is still going to be an unfamiliar environment to them at the very least. But they are the better team still, and the oddsmakers are telling you that, and Cal is still trying to become bowl eligible, man. Despite that big chunk of losses there, this still sets up for them to potentially do it, man. They need to win 2 of their last 4 to become bowl eligible, and they're a big favorite in this one, so they could win this game here. So they may still be focused for that bowl eligibility as well. So I don't want to fade Cal, even though it is kind of a weird environment for them to be going into. Wake Forest, like I said, has the same amount of rest. They're coming off beating Stanford. They won a couple of games in a row, close games against teams that are okay teams, I guess. UConn, Stanford, I don't know. They've kind of faced a difficult schedule, too. Ole Miss in there. Louisiana's pretty good. Virginia's pretty good. Clemson, NC State. This has not been an easy schedule for Wake either. They're returning home, and they're 4-4, so they're also probably looking for bowl eligibility as well. So I don't think they're going to be unfocused. It's just that their team is just a little bit less good. They run more than Cal does at the very least, with Claiborne there. Bachmeier is their quarterback. Bachmeier was making a lot of turnovers when he was, I think, where was he? La Tech last year or something? I forget where he was last year, but he's kind of limited the turnovers to some extent this year. So at least there is that. So Wake may be able to stay in this game, maybe. Totals at 55, though, and down from 55 to 55. Juice to the under, 59% of the cash and 87% of the, or 59% tickets, 87% of the cash on the over. So the cash percentage on the over, I'm not totally sure I would agree with that, although Cal should be able to score points against a Wake defense that isn't necessarily that good. Wake, I mean, their offense maybe isn't that bad either, and maybe should be able to get something going on the ground against Cal, too. I don't know. Cal is a bit better defensively than Wake is, though. Like, I don't want to touch this game in general, though. Rice, Memphis. Memphis down from 11 to 8, but I actually lean to the Memphis side a little bit here, especially at the better number. 60% of the tickets and 68% of the cash. I don't know what this move was. I don't know if there are injuries. I don't think there's any significant injury. There's no quarterback injury, as far as I know, or anything like that. I looked. It seems like both starters are going to be in there. But I lean to the Memphis side. They do have more of the cash with 68% of the cash, only 60% of the tickets. Total is down from 52.5 to 50.5. 67% of the tickets on the over. Public's only going to come in and play overs in a Memphis game. And Memphis has been putting up a lot of high point totals, but 69% of the cash is on the under in this one. I mean, the arguments for the under would be that Rice definitely struggles offensively, even though, but man, they have Kurt Warner's son as their quarterback, right? E.J. Warner, yeah, but he's not Kurt Warner. I mean, he's put up some decent games in some of them. I think he was hurt in this game against UConn. I don't know what that was, but I mean, he's okay at the very least. Their offensive attack is somewhat balanced with Connors putting up some decent numbers, but I don't know if Rice has a lot of offensive depth. They're more of a defensive team, actually. Their defense has been surprisingly decent. So I would not really want to find myself on an over here. I mean, it is a different animal playing Memphis than most of the teams they've faced, but than most of the teams that they've played or faced. They did face Tulane and hold their offense down a little bit, so that was fairly impressive that they did that. I mean, they haven't faced like a gauntlet of a schedule, really, so I don't know. Rice, they're obviously not a very good team, but I think they're in a bad spot at the very least, even though they are maybe the better defensive team in this game against Memphis, and they're getting points. So a lot of times you want to look to the better defense getting points, but in this spot, I don't want to do that because Rice, they're on a short week. They played on Saturday. Now they're having to turn around, go to Memphis, play on Friday, and they just beat Navy, man. And that's a big game. Rice beating Navy, but I think there's a little bit less to take away from that than what it seems on the surface. And Navy was in a hangover spot, man. They were undefeated up until they played Notre Dame, which was a big step-up game. People were talking about it. It was hyped, and Navy did not live up to the hype at all and got absolutely embarrassed by Notre Dame, got blasted. I think that just kind of derailed their season because they weren't used to losing. That was their first loss. I think that hung them over, and they lost that game twice, man. So Navy, I mean, I think that was the case with them. I think off of that Notre Dame game, they were not in a good spot against Rice, and Rice took advantage in that game. Rice, they outplayed them. I mean, there's no other way to look at that. Statistically, they did. It was a good game for Rice, but like I said, just keep in mind that was not a good spot for Navy there. Big upset win for Rice in that one. Rice was, a 13.5-point dog in that game at home. Big win for Rice. Rice, I mean, they have a chance to become bowl eligible if they win out. They probably know they're not going to do that. I mean, playing 2 games on the road here, so I think they're just playing out the stretch now. Memphis is, I don't know about Memphis, man, because I would say it looked like they were still battling to try to get into the American Conference Championship, but I think that's gone now, man. Memphis, because you have Army and Tulane both still undefeated, and Navy is 1 game ahead of them, too. I think Memphis, I think they're in a spot where they're not going to be able to do it now with too few games left. So Memphis might not be in the greatest spot either, but they're also kind of off an embarrassing loss where they lost to UTSA, who's kind of a middling team. Memphis, I assume, was favored. Yeah, Memphis is a 7.5-point favorite. And that when they actually outplayed UTSA and outgained them by 100 yards, so they were -2 in turnovers. So kind of a misleading result there. Memphis outplayed them and still lost. But that also broke their win streak that they had. And Memphis has not faced a very difficult schedule. So Memphis maybe isn't as good as they look. But the public might come in and say, wait a minute, man, Memphis lost to Navy and Rice beat Navy. And you're giving me 8 points with Rice? Give me Rice here, man. The public might do that transitive handicapping there. I don't agree with doing that, obviously. That can put you in some bad positions there betting-wise. You don't want to do that because every game is individual. That's what you want to look at. Memphis, I mean, losing to Navy, not embarrassing, really. And that was just a high-flying game, competitive game on both sides. I mean, not embarrassing to lose to a very good Navy team, especially when you're off a nice upset over Florida State. But Memphis, like I said, you could see this 2 ways. Either that UTSA game killed their winning momentum and it crushed their hopes to maybe win the American Athletics, so maybe it'll be a dream crusher scenario for them. You could look at it that way, possibly. Or you could look at it, say, they might actually show up focused because losing to UTSA as a favorite is a little bit of an embarrassing loss, so maybe Memphis will show up a little bit angry and saw what Rice just did last week and maybe still show up. That is the way that I lean slightly, but I'm not going to do it. And even though Rice does struggle offensively and play pretty good defense, which may have you leaning towards the under, which is the way the market is indicating, I'm not playing anything in that game. Up next is my actual play, and that is on UCLA plus 6.5. I like this, man. I like UCLA in this one, even though, yeah, I know I'm playing on UCLA 2 games in a row. A lot of times, you'll rarely see me playing the same team twice in a row, man, because usually when I play on a team, they're like catching a team that's better than them in a good spot, which UCLA did do that last week. They caught Nebraska in a bad spot for Nebraska. I mean, in a good spot for UCLA last week. So UCLA is now coming off an upset. So why do I like them here? Because usually I'm not going to want to be on that same team twice because that game that I played them is usually a step-up big game for them, and usually they're in a letdown after that. I don't think they are in this one, man. Iowa's up from 5.5 to 6.5. I think there are multiple reasons to fade Iowa here. I think the spot's bad for Iowa. I don't know if this is going to 7. I haven't seen the 7s, but, I mean, if you want to wait, I wouldn't mind waiting on this one to see if 7s do come up because at worst, you're still going to be playing plus 6, 6.5 here. It doesn't really matter between those 2 numbers. 58% of tickets are on Iowa, but cash evenly split 50-50. Total is low, down from 45.5 to 44.5. 74% of tickets, but 77% of cash on the over. But it does look like there is some movement towards the under, and it's a low total. It's by far the lowest total on the board. And when you're playing an underdog, getting points at home, you want that to be a low total, man, as I keep pointing out, because it means those points are worth a little bit more. The low total makes sense. I mean, the under actually makes sense here as well, because UCLA is a pretty one-dimensional offense, which I think I'll talk about in a minute, I guess. So UCLA can throw the ball. They can't really run it. Iowa is also a one-dimensional offense and a decent defense. Their defense looks like it's a little bit less good than it has been the last few years, but it's still a good defense for Iowa, and Iowa can't really throw the ball. They can run the ball, but UCLA actually is better at defending the run than the pass. So it looks like it lines up nicely for UCLA to be able to stay in this game for those reasons, and it looks like the under also might be the right way to look at the total in this one as well, because you have one-dimensional offenses here. Iowa's a team that plays defense. UCLA's defense actually hasn't been that horrific either. And like I said, Iowa's offensive strength plays up against UCLA's defensive strength. So UCLA might be able to hold Iowa's offense down a little bit. And I think that's all I would have to say about that, I guess. And UCLA, I think their passing offense also kind of plays into Iowa's more weakness on defense, if I remember correctly. I think Iowa's actually a little bit better at defending against the run than the pass. For UCLA, yes, I know they're coming off 2 nice wins on the road against Rutgers and Nebraska, but that shows me they can go into unfamiliar environments and actually play well, man, and beat these 2 teams. That shows me they're kind of starting to turn it on, man, and play well. I mean, they had a tough schedule here. UCLA might not be as bad as they look. I mean, they played Indiana, LSU, Oregon, and Penn State 4 straight games. That is a gauntlet of a schedule. They've had a very, very difficult schedule. So I think they're a little bit better than the record indicates. They're technically still live to make a bowl if they win 3 out of the last 4 games. And I don't know that that's out of the question because 3 of them are at home. It's possible that they can actually do that. I mean, it's slightly unlikely, although maybe if they get to 5 and 7 because they're UCLA, if there are bowl openings, they might be able to petition to get into one as well. But I think they're going to be focused. I mean, Iowa's a big Big Ten team coming into their house. So I think UCLA should be focused for that reason. And this is a short week, man. You're looking at 2 teams that played on Saturday. Who's the team that's going to have the edge when these teams both played on Saturday? It's going to be UCLA because they're playing at home, so they're used to playing in their environment. Whereas Iowa, even though, yeah, they're coming off a win over Nebraska, like I said, it's an upset win, a big win, but I think it could continue their momentum as well. Iowa, they're off of pummeling Wisconsin, which is still a big Big Ten matchup. I mean, they might be feeling pretty good, not only because they crushed Wisconsin, they became bowl eligible, and maybe they had higher aspirations because they were ranked, but they know they're not going to be getting into the playoff or anything like that. So getting that 6th win, they know they're bowl eligible now. They might take their foot off the gas a little bit, man, with Iowa. And on a short turnaround time, like I said, they have to go out to the Pacific Coast, where they have not gone to the Pacific time zone all year. The furthest west they've gone is Minnesota. I don't know how often they even go out to the Pacific Coast. It's not going to be often. It's one of these weird Big Ten scenarios where you have a team not used to going out to the Pacific Coast, having to not only go out to the Pacific Coast, but play a late game, 9 p.m. Eastern. So 7 p.m. or 6 p.m. Pacific Coast, but still, that's going to be a later game for Iowa, who plays in the Central time zone. So it's going to be late for their biological clock, too, on little rest, coming off getting bowl eligible and blowing out Wisconsin. This is a bad spot for Iowa, dude. Any way that you look at it. And they have switched quarterbacks to Sullivan from McNamara, but it hasn't looked like that's helped as he has not gone over 100 passing yards in either game. So I don't know that shakeup at quarterback really matters for Iowa. I don't know that that's really going to do anything. UCLA, I mean, their passing offense is the better offense. UCLA has the better passing offense. Iowa has the better rushing offense. I mean, take from that what you will. Garbers for UCLA is a dual threat quarterback as well. And I don't know how many dual threats Iowa faces over in the Big Ten either. So maybe they will be a little bit unfamiliar with defending that type of offensive scheme as well. So the play is UCLA plus 6.5. And then before I get out of here, New Mexico, San Diego State. San Diego State's down from 3.5 to 2.5. Public with 75% of tickets and only 56% of the cash on them. So it looks like market read, it looks like there is money coming in on New Mexico and driving the line towards New Mexico. Total down from 66.5 to 66, juice to the under. But under looks public somehow with 89% of the tickets and only 80% of the cash. I actually lean to the over in this one, and I do lean to the New Mexico side, but you are missing the +3 on this one if you like the New Mexico side. But the over makes sense to me because this New Mexico team, they just continue to play ridiculously high-scoring games for the most part. Their offense is actually good under Bronco Mendenhall. Felix Unger. No, under Bronco Mendenhall, or Stu Unger, the poker champion. New Mexico under Bronco Mendenhall, I mean, their offense is actually pretty good, and their defense has been a problem, to say the least. They've given up points to almost everybody. I mean, Utah State put up 45 against them. New Mexico State 40. Fresno 38. I mean, this is ridiculous. Even Montana State put up 35 against them and beat them. Air Force put up 37 against them. I mean, this is not... And Wyoming put up 49 against them. This is crazy, dude. New Mexico, I mean, this defense has been awful, but I like the New Mexico side because they're coming off an embarrassing loss to Wyoming, at the very least, so they might turn it back on for this one. This is going to be a short turnaround time, by the way, as well. I think for both teams, I think they both played on Saturday, so that also is more conducive to an over. We have both teams on short rest. That affects the defenses more. New Mexico, I like the side because they're coming off a couple embarrassing losses here. And with San Diego State coming into their house, it's a primetime game, so I do think they have reason to show up just for that reason. Even though they do have a ranked Washington State team up next. Primetime isolated game off an embarrassing performance I expect New Mexico will show up in this one. They have the better offense in this game, too, against San Diego State. San Diego State does have the better defense, but that's not really saying much. And San Diego State, actually, they played on Friday, so they actually don't have the short week. But still, I do think that maybe both teams are going to come into this a little bit unrested. And San Diego State, I don't know that they're going to be totally focused on New Mexico, man. When it's surrounded by Washington State, Boise State, and then UNLV, some really step-up games there for San Diego State. There were this pretty bad New Mexico State team in between the three there, so surrounded by bigger games. It has a sandwich aspect to it, so I lean to New Mexico for that reason as well. But San Diego State did get blown out in that game, but it was still a game you step up for, and then you just get kind of blown out by a much superior Boise team. It's like, what can you really do? San Diego State, I mean, against New Mexico's defense, San Diego State, even though their offense struggles with O'Neal there, the New Mexico defense might be the cure for that. Is you've seen bad offense after bad offense put up a lot of points against this New Mexico defense. So the over, I think, makes sense for that reason as well. I think San Diego State should be able to score in this game, and New Mexico doesn't play any defense. So like I said, New Mexico, I do think they have the better offense, though. And in this case, even though it's the better offense and not the better defense getting points, that's the way I look in this game, to the New Mexico side and to the over. And that's going to do it, man. One more time, all my plays here. And I forgot to look at, I think, what the rest spot was for Rice and Memphis. Maybe I should I look at that briefly before I get out of here? I got some time. I'm taking a different train here, so because I'm going to park at a different location here. Rice, let me see here. Rice is on a short turnaround time. Haven't played on Saturday, and I'm not sharing my screen anymore. Both of those teams are actually Rice and Memphis. Maybe I already mentioned that. And Cal and Wake Forest both had the, I think, the bye, the extra time off. So I think I did actually mention all of that. So that's going to do it for me, man. I'm Tower Gang Toad. My plays, a lot of plays tonight are in college basketball. St. Joe's -4.5. Hofstra -3.5. A lot of favorites. NBA, Cleveland -4.5. Houston +8.5. Also NBA. In college football, UCLA +6.5. Or if you can get the +7, not bad either. Daddy Falcor, good morning to you as well, sir. Toast. I like calling me Toast. That's the early morning edition of Toad. An hour on a morning video. Man, this is why I want to do these at night now with college basketball being way too much to talk about. Have a good one, everybody. Let's get some wins. Let's turn it around after I had a nice day 2 nights ago, and last night gave a lot of it back. So I'm still hovering like just above the break even on the year. I want to give myself some padding, like I said, and have a nice stretch run here with these with both basketballs in play here. I typically do well in both. So let's get it done. Peace out, everybody.